Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I am Pastor Guy, and this is Pastor's Corner. For those of you who are new to the corner, I'm Guy Watley, and welcome to my corner of the internet. This is a place where we get together once a week to encourage the believer on how to be in the world, but not of the world. If you like what you hear, please follow us on Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube. We live stream our Sunday morning services at 10:30, and we invite you to join us there as well. And of course, all of these stay in the log or in the file of Facebook and YouTube indefinitely. Anyway, welcome. We're glad you're here this morning. And this morning I wanted to take a quick trip down memory lane, maybe, to consider the book of Genesis. And I guess the question that I would ask is, do you believe the book of Genesis to be real? In other words, a real telling of history, or is it allegory? And allegory, just for definition, would be a poem or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal hidden meaning. In other words, something within and under the text. And I ask that question because really how you or what you believe about, and I guess for this discussion it would be the first 9, and you could go all the way to the first 11 chapters of Genesis. What you believe about them, what you think about them or understand about those chapters lays a foundation for how you believe and interpret the entirety of Scripture. And so looking at that this morning and just kind of delving into that a little bit, what do we have in Genesis? Well, Genesis is a retelling of the history beginning with the creation. Now, I'm not going to delve into the age of the earth and looking at those debates. We'll save that for another time. But I do want to look at or point to the historicity of the first Adam, of the created being, how God brought earth into being, and how we got here today, and what did the New Testament authors think about Genesis, specifically, again, the first 9 books to the first 11 books. In other words, did they believe that they are true? And so as we look at that, one of the things that I think is good for the debate or understanding would be the genealogies. When we look at Genesis, why is it full of genealogies? Who falls asleep? Who gets tired? Who struggles with reading the genealogies? And I would say many of us, most people do. We go through and walk down the list. Well, if you believe Genesis to be allegory and not so much history of humanity, then where along that timeline of genealogies do you think it begins? Do you think the true history begins? Does it begin anywhere before Noah? Let's just start with that, because we have detailed genealogies from Adam to Noah, from Seth to Noah. It is all outlined in there in Scripture. And so the question would be, if you don't believe in the biblical account that we have of creation, of Adam and Eve, the garden, the fall, all of those things. If you struggle with believing that, then where along that timeline do you say, oh, well, now from here forward it's true, or it's literal, it's no longer allegory? And then you have to pull in, what did the New Testament authors, what did the New Testament writers believe about Genesis? And we find that if just a cursory study of the New Testament, even of Jesus and who he quotes, for those of you who might argue that, well, I only believe in Jesus's words, well, you're free to have that argument, even though Scripture defines itself in the book of John as the Word, and the Word being flesh, which is Jesus. So in reality, all of Scripture are the words of Jesus, not just the little red letters. But he quotes Old Testament. He talks about Old Testament history as if it is true. He believes it. He quotes it as being real, not as being allegory, not as being story, but as being factual events that have happened. And so if you tend to distrust the first 9 to 11 chapters of Genesis, then you have a serious debate or argument with Jesus Christ, because he quotes them and believes them, quotes them as being history. So why the first 9 or 11 chapters? Well, the reason that we that I looked at that or pointed towards that is because that takes us up through the flood in Genesis 9, and then it goes to the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. And so once you have the Tower of Babel and the dispersion, then you begin Abraham's story, right? And so from that point forward, you have the father of the Hebrew faith, Abraham and Sarah, and we get their story. And so for most people who believe in Scripture, or who would say that they do, they don't struggle with Abraham forward. What they struggle with is the fall, let's go back, the creation of Adam, the fall, all the way up to and through the flood. And so that's where they would take umbrage or issue with the Bible, or say that is allegory, that is story. But the reality is, the truth is that it is God's history lesson for us. He shows us his original intent in creation. And he shows us that left to our own devices, we as people, we as humans, have a nature that will lead us astray. It is a fallen nature. And it leads to nothing but debauchery. You know, the mathematicians have done estimates, and it's easy to do. It's easy to, sit down. I always liken it back to those Prel shampoo commercials that would start off, I love Prel, and if you tell 2 friends, and you tell 2 friends, and you tell 2 friends, and within about 3 or 4 versions, the whole screen is full of people. It shows how rapidly we multiply mathematically, and you can do it. And so when we look at the genealogies, we can see how rapidly humanity multiplied on the earth. And there are estimates that at the time of the flood, there could have been 1 billion people on the planet. And out of those 1 billion, God found Noah. and his family. And he declared Noah to be righteous. And so we see that the heart of man is deceptive, and no one can know it, according to Scripture. And so why does God give us that history? He gives us that history to show us why we needed a Redeemer, why we needed Jesus Christ, why we were desperate and helpless apart from him. And so the flood comes, the new creation, we go into the dispersion at the Tower of Babel, and Adam, or Abraham, coming on the scene. And which, leads to the establishment of the Hebrew people. And so as we think about that, as we ruminate on that, as we let that roll around in our brain, to think that Genesis is allegory would be to miss the foundational truths and reality of who we are as people and our desperate need for salvation. And it all begins with Adam at the fall and the truth of that. Now, if you want to debate age of the earth and all of those other things, that we'll leave that for another time. But as we think about these things, as we want to look at Scripture and trust Scripture in a time such as this, when the world is turned upside down, when everybody is believing a lie, when our children are being taught that there are innumerable amount of genders, that anybody can be what they want today or tomorrow or the next day, that there is no such thing as a set gender from birth, that there's a difference between biology, sex, and gender, we realize that we are in a time just like in the beginning, in Noah's day, when everybody is believing and thinking as they see fit and calling it their truth. And the Bible reminds us that we have been there before, that God has seen it before, and that he will bring judgment. And that judgment will be severe, it will be swift, and it will be eternal. And apart from Jesus Christ, we have no hope. That's my thought for the day. Visit Genesis. Look at it from Christ's perspective as his story, or history, as we like to call it. I'm Pastor Guy. You guys have a wonderful day in the Lord, and be joyful as Scripture encourages us. And I will see you next week or Sunday if you tune in for the Sunday morning service. You be blessed, and I will see you again.